Thank you for coming. Let's begin. Bonjour tout le monde. Bienvenue. Welcome. I'm Michael Charles, the Executive Director for the Center for Human Rights, Equity, and Inclusion. On behalf of my entire team, many collaborating units across the university and a number of colleagues across the university, we welcome you to York University's 10th Annual Inclusion Day. Throughout the year, we are encouraged to reflect on how we might see our research, our teaching, our learning, and our governance through the lens of equity, diversity, and inclusion, or EDI for short. And we do so no more than on this signature day and in this special anniversary year. Inasmuch as Inclusion Day is a call to challenge ourselves to be more rigorous and reflective in pursuit of our goals, it is also an opportunity for celebration and inspiration. And all of you here today represent EDI hopes and aspirations. Whether you're a student, a faculty member, a member of staff, our global alumni, and I think there is also some folks from the broader community, all of you by your presence represent and manifest, I think, an ongoing interest and expectation about societal and institutional EDI performance. And so we appreciate your numbers here today and taking time out in difficult weather to come and have a conversation about this particular topic. Throughout the event and after, we invite you to share your reflections discreetly on your mobile by accessing your preferred social media platform and using the hashtag Inclusion Day 2019. And then afterwards, we invite you to stay back and discuss with colleagues what you've heard today in the atrium area. I understand there's also a kosher selection as well for those who are interested. To center ourselves, we begin by acknowledging York's presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Takaranto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Wendat, and the Métis. And it is now home to many Indigenous peoples. And we also acknowledge the current treaty holders and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, who confirmed this territory as subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. And we speak the land acknowledgement as more than just a reminder of history. Our colleague, Ruth Colazar-Green, I don't know if she's here, as well as Randy Pedawanakwat, and others to their sides and before them, rightly insist that the acknowledgement urges us to reevaluate our past as well as our present understanding of shared responsibility. And just to prove that I was listening at a prior presentation, specifically the threefold teaching of the Dish with One Spoon holds. There is enough for everyone, don't take more than your fair share, and don't spoil or foul the dish. And if we sense some connection between this teaching and the broader concept of equity, we would not be wrong. Indigenous approaches to sharing and mutually accountability, resonate with the call for increased access by underrepresented demographic groups to the institutions and systems organizing our society within a wider framework of fairness. And in this way, the instruction from the perspective of Indigenous decolonization to share the land and its resources is also extended more generally to ideas about the sharing of power and opportunity. But while this connection between decolonization and equity is foundational, there is another equally important and distinct point of convergence among Indigenous and non-Indigenous aspiration. And that second point will be the focus of our discussion today. So in addition to mutually accountable sharing, we today look at what happens in those decolonized and equitable moments when courageous flashes of inclusion allow us to engage in the transformative work of co-creation. And today we imagine and rededicate ourselves to the opening up of cross-cultural and interdisciplinary possibilities occurring at sites of authentic belonging. And we call this innovation through inclusion. Now, not accidentally, the seeds for today's focus were planted at last year's Inclusion Day. In describing the impact of Canada's origin story on Indigenous peoples, keynote speaker Kathleen Mahoney set out the ways in which the mythologies, the values, and the narratives used to chart our history, inform our laws, and determine our very identity devastated Indigenous lives. But importantly, she also spoke about how those origin stories serve to erase the legacy of Indigenous and European co-creation occurring in the centuries and the decades leading up to the birth of this nation. So those stories cause us to forget the multiple innovations that came into being through that relationship. And of course, those included the integration of Aboriginal and European trading practices and structures, the adoption of Indigenous legal traditions by the British and the French, and ultimately the development and implementation of a nation-to-nation partnership. So viewed through a decolonized historical lens, this country was not originally imposed by one group on another, but was the product of the collective ingenuity of three peoples: the British, the French, and Indigenous inhabitants of this land. So as we turn our attention to our theme, innovation through inclusion, never relinquishing the principle of fairness insisted upon by decolonization and equity, but embracing as well the unbound engagement, the inventive possibilities, and the generative potential that lies beyond that precondition. And we are so fortunate to have the opportunity today to hear from 4 global leaders and thinkers whose work is preoccupied with our theme. And their bios are set out in full on our website, so I won't impose on their time by detailing them now. But they will help us to bring a contemporary understanding of the relationship between innovation and inclusion out of abstraction and into more tangible relief. The kind of relief that will permit us to be inspired, to create more vivid pictures, and take more decisive and optimistic steps. Adrian Fung will walk us through the ways in which some of the greatest musical innovations were discovered from a journey through difference rather than a circling amongst sameness. Sarah Kaplan will explore the role of gender in fostering a growing and more dynamic economy. And Usha Srinivasan will pick up that thread of Sarah's work and extend it as it relates to the commercialization of scientific and technological discovery. And finally, Fred Swaniker will look at how experiments in inclusive curriculum and pedagogy are driving excellence in educational outcomes in Africa. So thank you to Adrian, to Sarah, to Usha, and to Fred for accepting our invitation. Thank you also to our sponsoring partners, Miller Thompson. You are truly community champions. And of course, there is none more willing to stand as a champion than our president, Rhonda Lenton, who I know from personal conversation thinks about these issues with a kind of seriousness of heart and mind that is so required. And as I ask her now to offer opening thoughts and prepare our celebrations in a good way, I want to wish all of you a wonderful Inclusion Day.
Well, Michael, I didn't know what a difficult speaker you were going to be to follow. Thank you, Michael. Good morning, everyone. Bienvenue à tous. Bonjour. I want to thank you all for joining us at York University as we celebrate the annual Inclusion Day. It really is a very special celebration, not only because it's the 10th anniversary of the event, but also because it falls in York University's 60th anniversary year. Both of these milestones allow us to reflect on the legacy of building a comprehensive, community-engaged university that's committed to expanding student access to a high-quality, research-intensive university that's committed to the public good. I'm going off script, so I'm sorry. I have a bad habit of doing that. Today's theme, innovation through inclusion, also reminds us that realizing that vision for York will require an institutional culture and institutional processes that allow for the mutual enrichment of all university members and their communities. Our commitment to inclusion is longstanding. It's reflecting an appreciation for the value that a diverse community with multiple identities and perspectives brings to bear on the complex challenges we face in a global knowledge economy. And that theme runs through the 4 pillars that I've been emphasizing as president of York: access, connectedness, excellence, and impact. The pillar of excellence in the context of York's success speaks to the quality of our students, our staff, our faculty, to the learning experience that our students receive, and to the scholarship, research, and creative activities that we undertake and apply in helping to build inclusive, sustainable communities. We also strive for connection, and we've accelerated our efforts to create community hubs within the university that are interdisciplinary and cross-sectoral. That collaboration is so essential with private sector, not-for-profits, all levels of government, and higher education, with both local communities and internationally, working to develop mutually beneficial and reciprocal relationships. Our impact today is demonstrated by the academic foundations that we provide for our students, the innovative research breakthroughs of our faculty, and the positive differences made by an ever-growing and diverse global network of alumni and partners. To speak to a recent example, we launched the Indigenous Studies program in the Department of Equity Studies in the fall. And in line with our Indigenous framework, we also introduced the new Indigenous and Aboriginal law requirement for JD students at our Osgoode Hall Law School. I'm always excited to see how these and other initiatives will inform our pedagogical and our curricular practices, not simply for those immediately involved, but for all of us throughout the university and beyond. I want to just share with you this morning that I was interviewed by Omni TV about our internationally educated bridging program. And as I was walking over here today, I was thinking about the various challenges that we have and the tremendous opportunity that we have, while at the same time, we are finally taking up with a level of seriousness our response to the Truth and Reconciliation Report. We are also at a time in the country that by 2030, 80% of all of our growth, net new growth, will be due to immigration. We need approximately 325,000 new immigrants to keep pace with what is anticipated to be a labor shortage. So we have to think about the ways in which our history as a country and what is happening in terms of our immigrant population, how this is all going to be woven together to really build a very inclusive country where everyone feels welcome and has the opportunity to succeed. I'm really delighted that there is such a distinguished panel of speakers who are able to join us. I very much appreciate the time that you're making and to share with everyone here. I won't go through all the names as well because Michael just did it, so I'm just going to say a very quick thank you to Adrian, Sarah, Usha, and Fred for joining us today. And I really am going to apologize in advance that I can't stay to hear all of the remarks, but I know it's going to be a very interesting conversation. We're also grateful to our event partner, Miller Thompson, LLP, for their community leadership. And I just want to say that by gathering here, we have the opportunity to rededicate and renew our commitment to a more inclusive university and a more inclusive world. So I'm grateful to each and every one of you in the room that you took the time today to come and to be part of this important conversation. In closing, I'd like to say a special word of thanks to Michael Charles. Many of you will know that he is leaving us for a new opportunity at Carleton University. Michael, I want to thank you for the leadership that you have provided at, obviously, the Center for Human Rights, Equity, and Inclusion. But more broadly than that, for the leadership that you have provided at the university to encourage us to think differently, to think about ways in which we can actually implement that commitment to inclusion, and for the way in which you've represented us outside of the university. I know we're all going to miss the fact that you're not here doing that, but we're very glad that you're staying in this space and that you'll continue to be a strong voice, and just want to thank you very much on behalf of all of us. Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Miigwech.
Hello, my name is Adrian Fung, and among other things, I'm a cellist. But I was one time in Munich, ARD, at a competition, and a news reporter interviewed me and was very much on my side. They said, "We love how you play Shostakovich," which is a Russian composer, and in this piece, he used idioms within the jazz tradition. And I was living in San Francisco at the time, and he says, "You know what? You're really good at jazz because you live in San Francisco." I said, "Oh, okay." I didn't think much of that. And then I told him about my next program, which was going to be Mozart. And he says, "Mozart? Why would you choose to play Mozart?" I said, "Well, he's one of the great composers, and I really think I have something to say with this piece." And he says, "Well, you're Chinese. You're Canadian. And you live in San Francisco. Why are you playing Mozart? How can you bring authenticity to Mozart?" I didn't know what to say. I sat there thinking that classical music, the arts, we are an inclusive space, that everybody has a platform and a place, a voice, to be able to have a conversation about pieces that are celebrated the world over. And at that point, I realized that some work needed to be done. We in classical music, we can get kind of preservationist about our excellence. We're saying Beethoven wouldn't do this. He wouldn't work with a DJ. Of course he wouldn't work with a DJ. There was no DJs at the time. But I believe that if there were DJs, he would have. And so in this capacity, when we talk about excellence, when we talk about moving away from trying to preserve and celebrate our excellence, we need to realize that back then, in that time, if you look at Bach, for instance, how many of you heard Bach in his music? Incredible, right? This guy lived 250 years ago, and we know his music. But to go back in that time and to really realize what he did was not be preservationist in any way. He was actually a very global character. In his Germanic tradition, thank you, in his Germanic tradition, he was really interested in what the French were doing. This is not something that the Germanic traditional composers were into. They felt, you know what, we're really going to push and dig deep into what we have to say to the world. Bach wasn't so interested in this. He wanted to know what the French were doing. And in so doing, he listened to the organ preludes, he listened to their traditional dance in the bourrée and the courante. And if he didn't do this, we wouldn't have the cello suites today. We wouldn't have the English suite. We wouldn't have the French suite for the clavier. He demonstrated that he had to go outside of his echo chamber to be able to find new inspirations and to find new ways and new paths for creativity. Haydn is the gentleman in the middle. And what I love about Haydn was that he went into bars and clubs back in the day and appropriated these pop songs. It would be like if I were to be a composer and I went to Drake and said, "Hey, that's a cool little lick. Can I put that into a symphony for you?" That's what Haydn did. And of course, the famous Beethoven on the far right. I love Beethoven because he struggled with something in his deafness. But through this, we have a rich treasure because all his conversations were in a book. That's how he was able to converse with his friends. And it's through these pages that we're able to understand where his mind went, what he was thinking about. And he was reading about Taoism, Eastern mysticism, Eastern philosophies, just really breaking the molds of his mind that they weren't doing in Viennese society of that period. And around that same time, he wrote the Ninth Symphony, the Grosse Fugue, and Opus 133, which many scholars would tell you single-handedly heralded in the Romantic period. In his inclusive practice. He was not only trying to affect his own thinking, but his own values. And we see incredible, a mining of incredible gems because of that. I'm going backwards. Bela Bartok. He was a Hungarian composer. Many of you know him. Bartok went into the countryside and listened to, he was part of ethnomusicology. He would find works and try to record them, both in written terms and also having his friends come along and play alongside so that they could create a channel for this oral tradition. And he said that the richest music, the richest folk music, isn't found in the center of the country, but at its borders, where cultures mix and mingle. And he wrote this at a time when Hungary was having deep conversations, some dangerous conversations with fascism and protectionism and ways of trying to preserve their excellence and their place in history. And Bartok didn't get into the political fray in that way, but he said it from a point of his music, from his art, what he truly believed. Edge effect is one of these wonderful models that I use not only as an artist, but in what we try now at the University of Oklahoma to teach the next generation of artists. How many of you have heard of the edge effect? The edge effect, a few of you have, so I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes talking about it. The edge effect is essentially a phenomenon that happens in ecology, where you have two different ecosystems meet. Where they meet is kind of like a Venn diagram. Where they meet, you have incredible examples of creativity, of innovation. And what we see here is there's a multiple of 3 species. So let's just say the circle on the left is a grassland, and the circle on the right would be a body of water. We know how marshlands work, and we see that the grass grows taller, the insects may be more colorful, maybe larger. There's different types of species. One way of explaining is that a deer probably wouldn't really thrive in the middle of a lake, and a fish not in the middle of a forest or in the middle of a field. But in this place of intersection is where we have the greatest forms of life. And we can see from the 3 examples before how they mined their own edge effects to an incredible place. And so we talk about empathy in the arts a lot. And what we like to talk about is creative empathy. And what does that actually mean? How do we take what we learn from different types of people and different types of culture and mine what we talk about a lot in terms of artistic excellence, in terms of doing things that are not just gimmicky, aren't just for the sake of doing something, but to actually marry this with what we do and what we can be proud of doing. And there's a difference that many people talk about in terms of empathy and sympathy. And a lot of people say that sympathy is when you feel sorry for somebody. And in many ways, it's a kind of model for disconnection, because you're just saying, well, yeah, I feel sorry for you. I participated on a certain level, but you're over here and I'm over here. Whereas empathy would be, I feel sorry with you. I'm trying to put myself into that place, and I'm trying to understand it from your eyes, from your shoes, and from a standpoint that I have to work to do so. And so in many ways, I call sympathy the wedge effect, where the 2 ecosystems are actually apart, where empathy is actually true edge effect. And there's an element of maximizing edges. You know, I am not a politician. I'm not a major thought leader. I'm just an artist. I play cello. But many of the ways that I try to mine these kinds of values, to understand how we can push forward, that where we aren't just creating an echo chamber, where we're celebrating dead white European composers, is in trying to maximize those edges and trying to understand how we can take what we learned from nature, from some of the greatest artists of our time, and how do we move that forward. This is a picture of the Mississippi River. And we all know that this has been a place rife with battles, blood, warfare, great times of economic wealth. And many people say that it's because of this crenulated way that it goes through, that it maximizes its edge, that it's not just a straight line from A to Z. And I like thinking that sometimes in our lives, because of the mental models, because of the pace of the world, we like to just jump to the conclusion, A to Z. Let's just get there as quick as possible, straight line. Whereas sometimes the greatest journey is from B to Y, to take that journey and to really not smell the roses, but to see what your friend thinks of the smell of that rose. And so one of the things that I find myself thinking is that if this were a pond, how do we maximize the edge of that pond? Other than making it, let's say you want to double the edge of that pond, double the surface area of where the white is grass and the blue is water. Many people say, well, you just make the pond twice as large. The circumference would actually catch that edge. And this is a puzzle I like to do with my own students, but I'm sure you guys already have the solution. Does anybody have a solution for how you double the edge of this pond? Exactly. Thank you very much. So people are going like this. You crenulate the edge, and you can get actually double. So in the first example, let's say it's 100 square meters of a pond in circumference. You have 35 meters of an edge. But if you just explore it a little bit, how much can we learn from this kind of insight? That you're just like, well, I'm a cellist, so I'm just going to play Bach, Beethoven, all these kinds of things. But how can we find those those points of empathy? I just got the 5-minute mark, so I'm gonna burst through a little bit. These are glasses, obviously, but they also have foam insides to them. What we often sometimes do is we also rub lotion onto these lenses in my classes, and it's because so much of our concert experience is not meant for the visually impaired. If you really think about when an audience member comes in, we try to journey map their experience, how much of their clarity of vision is being depended on without us saying anything. And so we go through the entire concert experience wearing these glasses to try to understand better how we can actually mind some of those edges. And so there's a few examples of these, but I'm just gonna move forward a little bit. But essentially, how do we become more empathetic? We have to work hard to find exercises so that we can understand another person's experience. And the Arts Incubation Lab at the University of Oklahoma is where we're trying to do these kinds of things. It's trying to understand how we can create experiences where we come together and understand one another in a better way. I think that if we do these kinds of things, we can better understand why classical music as an industry is on a general decline, why we have some of the conversations we're having with other cultures where we try to talk before we listen, and we can better understand another person's point of view. So creative empathy is part of why I feel inclusion is such an important aspect of it. Inclusivity, inclusion, this methodology, this idea, this concept is so important for all of us. But in the arts, and maybe outside of the arts, it's not the easiest methodology to implement. And for me, in my work in the arts, as an educator and as a practitioner, I found that really mining what it means to be empathetic is a start, the beginning of how we might be able to create those channels of inclusion. Thank you. I'll do this.
Okay, greetings everyone. Thank you very much for including me today. I do want to echo the acknowledgement of the traditional lands of the indigenous people here, and that is still home to many people on Turtle Island. And at the same time, I want to acknowledge the problematics of the acknowledgement in the sense that if we don't actually make those commitments real in terms of action and in terms of change, then it becomes acknowledgement theater. and I worry about engaging in acknowledgement theater, similar to the fact that I'm also very grateful to be here and to be invited, and thank you very much for including me in this terrific event today to talk about diversity, inclusion, and making that real. But I do a lot of these keynotes, and I'm beginning to worry that I'm engaging in diversity and inclusion theater and not in really pushing us to do something different. I think we could satisfy ourselves by saying, look, we had this fantastic event for Diversity Inclusion Day, 10th anniversary. But what we, all of you in the audience, and myself included, need to think about is what are we actually going to commit to do differently? And these commitments have to, for each of us, acknowledge our own positions of privilege. Because even if we do face some forms of discrimination in our life, we also, by the very fact that we're in a university here, experience some forms of privilege. And I think, therefore, when you're trying to make change in the face of privilege, it's going to potentially be uncomfortable. It's potentially going to take your time. It's potentially going to be costly. And I want to encourage us to think about the ways that we can do that. And I'm going to talk a little bit today, very much building on the ideas that Adrian brought up about how we could think about, I'm going to talk specifically about gender because that's what I spend my time on. I run the Institute for Gender in the Economy. It's my focus. But I think we could apply a lot of these principles in other areas. And what I want to do is talk about how we could think about these challenges as innovation challenges. Because if you think about innovation, whether it's in the corporate world or the university world, everyone's excited about innovation, right? Everyone's put the best and brightest on. Let's put our creative minds to this. Let's think really differently to innovate. And then when we come to diversity and inclusion, everyone's like, oh, it's so hard, or whatever. And what I want to say is let's actually take that innovation mindset, put it to thinking about gender equality and and other kinds of inclusion and think about what that could bring. I'm not going to hammer the pictures of dead white men, but again, tying into Adrian's talk, you know, there's all these people saying now there's a case, a business case, some reason, some benefit, some incentive for other people, for these people on this screen to take advantage of diversity and inclusion because it's going to lead to better performance. And I'm spending a lot of my time actually trying to get us away from that business case mentality because I don't think it's actually working. In fact, if you look at the statistics on gender equality, we're actually sliding backwards. And Canada specifically is sliding further back relative to a number of its peers. So I'm not sure this business case, there's an incentive for you to do it aspect is really working. I think we really need to think more about how other ways to talk about the challenge. And I want to give you an example of this again, because I work in the business world, but this I think will just give you a sense of where I think some of the barriers are. So as you may know, companies that are exchanged on the Toronto Stock Exchange are actually required to do something which is called comply or explain, which says if you don't have diversity on your board, you have to say what your targets are going to be, or you have to say why you don't have targets, or you have to explain why you don't have diversity. And despite almost 4 years now of this effort, what we see is only about 16% of the corporate directors are women. What does this mean? That the companies that are driving our economy are being governed by a very non-diverse set of people, and yet they're making choices that are really important for our economy. And if you look at boards that have even more than one woman, it's only 34%, and 31% still have no women on their boards at all. When you, wrong clicker. When you ask the companies as part of this regulation, do you have a diversity policy? Well, in fact, fewer than half even have a policy. And when you ask them if they have a target, only 17% even have a target. And when you ask them why that would be, they say it's all about meritocracy. They say, we don't want to compromise meritocracy by adding those pesky women to the board. It will result in us not selecting the best candidates. There's no women out there. We can't find them. I'm like, I'll give you 2,500 names literally right now. We can't find these women. All of these excuses. Now, by the way, these are documented in documents that companies have to file for the government, right? But these excuses I hear every single day. I just got stuck on a panel at a conference and I found out I'm the only woman on it. And the guys, all the guys who organized this said, oh, well, we worked really hard, but we just couldn't find any women. And I'm like, well, then work harder. Like, how hard could you have worked if you couldn't find, I mean, the Academy of Management has 22,000 academics in it. You couldn't find any women? Like, it's just a mystery to me. So these are excuses that happen all the time. And what worries me is that I think this idea of meritocracy, and going back to the notion that the president of the university talked about, the idea of excellence can sometimes get in the way of us making progress. But it's a fake notion, in my view. And here's why. How many of you have ever taken the implicit association test on the Harvard website, where you basically learn to hate yourself, right? You take the test and you find out that you are sexist, racist, homophobic, anti-Muslim, whatever it is, because there's a lot of tests you can take. If you haven't taken it, I can encourage you to go, because it's good to be self-aware. The problem with taking this test or thinking that you can fix people simply by working on their implicit biases is that these are very hard to break down. In the case of gender, 17 million people have taken this test, and it says that, almost 80% of people associate women with family and men with career. And what does that mean? That means when you get into a work setting, you don't think that women are work people. You don't think that they're qualified. You don't think that they're excellent. You think that they're going to be breaking down the merit. And this is a primary frame. It colors everything that we do and everything that we see. By the way, this is very gender binary. Part of the problem with a lot of the statistics I'm going to show you, and even on this, is that no one is actually looking at gender, non-binary, and transgender issues. If you ask for statistics, they just don't exist. One of the projects we're doing at the Institute of Gender and the Economy is actually trying to develop statistics around these things. So I'm going to be replicating the binary here, but it's not going to be for long. We're going to try to fix that too. But these tests are really looking just at the binary. So what does that mean when you have that association? It means that it's actually affecting your ability to assess what is meritocratic. So a lot of people complain that the problem is there aren't good enough women. There are not enough good women, proposing startups, or there are not good enough women for the board. So a lot of academics have now done studies that say, okay, we're going to control for that quality. So for example, in the first bars, you'll see on hiring. People are waving. I'm not sure if are you waving? Okay. So on hiring. And so one set of researchers, actually many sets of researchers now, have done a thing where you actually send out the exact same resume, and the only thing you manipulate is the name. And you find that people think that Jennifer is less hireable than John. But the quality is the same, so you're not actually making a meritocratic choice. Startup pitching. Everyone says, well, why is there only 6% of money in Silicon Valley going to female-led startups? So they did actually equal pitches where they had the same PowerPoint document, the same narrative, and the only difference was one had a female voice narrating it and one had a male voice narrating it, and they had investors assess, would you invest in this? And it turns out the male voice of the exact same business is twice as investable as the female voice. Okay, now you're thinking, well, people are involved, that's complicated. Let's just have people work on computers. So people work on computers, they think that they're doing fine, everyone assesses the computers as having the equal capabilities, but then you tell some people that their computer is named Julie and some people that their computer's name is James, and then you ask them, how much is this computer worth? And weirdly enough, James is worth more than Julie. So what is this telling you? This is telling you that meritocracy is a fake idea. That it's not meritocracy. When we say we're compromising meritocracy, what we're actually saying is we're compromising our privilege, because we are leaving out people who are qualified, and we need to change that. And we can't change it simply by changing our brains. We need to change our systems. Okay, so just to highlight the fact that there are no gender differences on a lot of the things that people think there are gender differences. Yes, on average, women are shorter than men on average. But when it comes to things like risk-seeking that people often say is a big difference between women, the research actually tells you that there is no difference. But that bias, that gender as a primary frame, makes Silicon Valley a horrible place for women. It means that there are more CEOs named John of Fortune 500 companies than women altogether. So if your name is John, good for you, you have good chances. It means that when companies start talking about diversity and inclusion, like Google did, you get a guy like James Damore writing a memo saying, this is going to be horrible, it's going to compromise our meritocracy. So what I want to say is we need to rethink that excuse. And we often hear women saying, well, I don't want quotas because I wouldn't want to be there just because there's a quota. But what you're really saying when you say that is, I'm reinforcing the patriarchy, because the patriarchy is what's telling you that quotas are getting in the way of quality. But quotas are not getting in the way of quality. They're actually just righting the balance. They're getting us to get the quality in that's being excluded because of the kinds of biases that are built into our systems. And a lot of research that I've done, if you actually talk to people in the situations, what they will tell you is meritocracy is actually just reinforcing the majority position. It's just reinforcing the people in positions of privilege. And that's why you get the statement that now travels around the internet, which I love so much: when you're accustomed to privilege, equality is going to feel like oppression. When you're accustomed to privilege and then you feel like you didn't get that job because some woman got it because they needed to hire a woman. I hear this all the time. That feels like oppression to you because you thought you were working hard. But the problem is you're working hard with tailwinds. I'm white, so I have a ton of tailwinds when it comes to that. I'm cisgender, I have a ton of tailwinds that come with that. I'm a lesbian, so maybe I have some headwinds that come with that. But that's the kind of thing that we're not thinking about. And so why we get the pushback to the initiatives that we're talking about is because of this challenge. Now, when we actually want to then think about how do we get the inclusion that we need and this connection to this question of innovation, the reason that diverse teams, when people do say that diverse teams lead to better outcomes, the reason they do is not because somehow we have different brains and therefore we bring different ideas. It's because actually being together in that diversity creates discomfort. And the discomfort leads us to have different processes. We listen more, we empathize more, we try to get inside the process. And when we do that, we actually get better outcomes precisely because we're uncomfortable. I invite you to be uncomfortable because it's the discomfort that's actually going to give you the benefits. Other scholars have talked about diversity as being sort of a muscle that you develop because, and as we say with the gym, no pain, no gain. You don't get this. It's not easy. Diversity is not something you sprinkle on top and feel good about yourself. Diversity is something that you have to build in through exercise, through effort. And that exercise and effort can produce innovative outcomes. And that's what I'm hoping for all of us. So a lot of people who've known me for a long time wonder what I'm doing talking about gender, because I've always been an innovation scholar. I've always done research in this area. But the reason that I have moved into gender is, one, I have to do this as my day job because we haven't made enough progress. But two, because I think we can take an innovation lens and really make a difference. And so I keep crossing this number out. I just put the 9 up. Now I'm going to have to cross it out next year and put 2020. I want to retire sometime, so we need to start making efforts so that I can stop crossing this number out. And so what I think we can do, I'm an American immigrant to Canada. What I think we can do in the Canadian context, and I think York University can be at the forefront of this, is coming up with a Canadian model, an inclusive model of innovation that takes advantage of these principles of discomfort, these principles of inclusion, and thinks about innovation in a very different way. I won't go into a ton of details, but just to show you, there's all sorts of companies that are actually taking advantage of this to design, for example, new mammograms or new breast pumping devices or new ways of investing that actually start with inclusion as the primary principle for innovation as opposed to something that you add on the end. And when you do that, you have the power to really get change by starting with inclusion as opposed to thinking of it as some kind of add-on. And so what I will conclude with is just saying I invite you into the discomfort. I invite you to actually make real efforts that are potentially costly, because I think we don't even know what the world could look like if we actually tried to do that. And I think there's tremendous potential, and I think this conversation is a start for that. So thank you very much. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. I have to say thank you, Sarah, for setting that stage. I'm a South Asian woman, not very tall, and I immigrated to Canada only in my 30s. So maybe something is working because I'm on the stage, and there's an acknowledgement that I have something to say. So maybe I'm a proud Canadian, and hopefully I'd like to share my slides up. Oh, great. Okay, hopefully I don't mess this up. I have to be honest, this is not the audience I usually speak to. I'm usually talking to startups and VCs. So this is going to be very different for me. Hopefully what I say is exciting for you to hear. And in our small way, we're trying to, in the tech community, trying to think about what diversity, inclusion, and belonging is. What does that mean? And is that something that we should be embracing? And if you don't, what is the consequences of that? So hopefully I'll share a little bit about our work. So I don't want to assume that everybody knows about Mars. So I'm going to tell you what our organization is, why we are created, what is it that we do, how we do it, and what's our reach. And then tell you about the diversity of entrepreneurs that we have currently. And it didn't happen overnight. We did not have diversity in our entrepreneurs when we first opened our doors. And I'm proud to say I've been at Mars for 10 years, and I like to think I have something to do with that efforts. And we have the diversity. Still a lot of work to be done, but getting there. And then in our programs, how do we think about inclusivity in our programs to make sure we are not the elitist Toronto-based organization, but really making sure we are making things accessible to all communities. And so we've done a lot of work around that. And then lastly, about our recent work around DIBS to really help our companies think about DIBS as a sourcing strategy. Like if you leave that community out, you're not going to progress your company forward. So let's get started with first about Mars itself. You may or may not have seen this building at the corner of University and College. It's 1.5 million square foot space. It is the largest urban innovation center. I'd like to think that we are very open. It does feel a little sterile. It does feel sterile because we're right next to the university hospital. But when you come in, there's so much animation, so much activity going on, and we have to do a better job of bringing the community in, and we try and do that with thousands of events and so on. So I like to call this the hardware of Mars, the space. And a lot of people say, do you need the space and place to increase the connectivity? And I think I'm seeing that, yes, we need that place to make it inclusive. So we have all kinds of corporates and startups, et cetera, in the place. And the why of why we were created is our founder, Dr. John Evans. He is an extraordinary Canadian. I had the lucky fortune of meeting him while he was still alive. He passed of Parkinson's a few years ago. He, after of all the various things he did in his life, one of the things was he started a biotech company in the 80s. And he realized the amount of research that we create, research output we create in this region, in the Toronto region, in the Ontario region, we don't commercialize that enough. $1.5 billion of R&D dollars get spent in those two streets alone, but not enough commercialized. How can we change that? How can we bring economic output from that commercialization and create jobs for this province? That was one of the main reasons it was created. In this space, we've spent a lot of time and effort curating who's in the space. We have, well, I like to call it the commercialization continuum. Everybody from doing research in the lab to large corporations like Autodesk and Facebook, and then the 80 or so, 80 to 100 startups in the space. We have a collection of everyone that we need in the commercialization continuum in the space. In terms of who we focus on, what we do, health was a clear space that we started in because we were right in the Discovery District. However, as you can imagine, it takes a lot of effort to create that one therapeutic compound or medical device. It's a long commercialization cycle. And so the who showed up was a lot of the mobile apps and web products and so on. But over the years, a lot of the universities, actually, we work very closely with York U, which is a University of York University's accelerator here. We work with others across the province as well. We're able to give warm referrals to other kind of products that come to us, which we're not experts in agri-tech or other Main Street businesses. We send them around the province, but we focus on these four sectors: health, clean tech, fintech, and enterprise. And we're also looking for the cross-section of this with other disruptive technology areas, whether it's AI and machine learning or data and security or advanced materials and manufacturing. We're looking for something that's has an intellectual property, and has the opportunity to become the next big global company in Canada. In terms of the volume of people and how we work with them, we have about 1,200 companies that we work with. And all of these services are free of charge to our companies because it's funded by the province of Ontario. But as you can imagine, as the pipeline is really big, so 65% of the 1,200 are sitting in the early stage. We call them start. They're under $1 million in revenues. As they grow to 1 to 5 million, we call them grow, and then scale for 5 million plus. It's a lot of effort we put into looking for that diamond in the rough. Who's the next amazing company that's going to come out of this work that we do? And it's a lot of hard work to running an accelerator within an incubator and finding those amazing companies and opportunities. And this is where the inclusivity part comes. One of the things that it didn't translate. Those colors didn't translate so well. You can see some of it. Like I said, who do we care a lot about being inclusive in our environment, very conscious of the fact that we're right here, right in Toronto, but our programs and our services extend to rest of Ontario. And I'll tell you more about that. But currently, this is our last year's survey of who we work with as entrepreneurs. As you can see on the very left side, half of the founders that we work with are not born in Canada. They're from foreign countries. It didn't start that way. I mean, we were not inclusive in the beginning, meaning, and in some honest truth about when people come to Mars or they go to the leadership, do they see themselves there? That matters, right? They see me or see our CEO or other president. So I'm proud to say our president is an immigrant from Taiwan. He came here when he was 4 years old. Our president is immigrant from Africa, and he came here when he was 6 years old. So we all, they can see the faces of themselves in the leadership of the organization, so that they feel comfortable walking through the door and saying, I want your help me grow my business. So half of them are not born here. In gender, we're getting there. We're not as good as, a lot of work to be done still. About 25% of the women, of the entrepreneurs we work with, the founders are women. It didn't start that way. It was 8%. An interesting thing that we did in terms of the content of the programming was we introduced social impact into our content. Immediately, the number of women that came to our organization increased. They could see that they were going to be working on something just not because it was about making money, but it was actually about creating impact in the community, and they showed up. And similarly about youth, we work with youth. People have this notion that startups are all about youth. In fact, 76% of the people we work with are not, are over the age of 30, because as you can imagine, if it's a high IP-related products, they're typically in their PhDs or postdoc stage, and so they tend to be at an older age group. And similarly with our senior team in the companies, we are seeing that change in terms of the origin of where they were from and so on. These are some of the operating principles that I work with and Mars works with to make things inclusive. So we build for scale, which is inclusive in the sense that make it online, make it accessible so that people don't have to come to a physical location, although it's important to us to have that physical space if they are able to, but that is not a barrier for them to use the services. Build with data, really have evidence, understand who's your audience, what's going on, and use that to build the right kind of products. Build for community. Get them into the spaces, not just in our space, in other places too, to build that peer-to-peer connection. And then last, this is the recent work that we've been working on the past year, is building for inclusivity in mind as a lens, to be conscious of that. And so I won't go through this, but we have, since 2009, our programs have evolved from in-person to online to blended learning. And a lot of people don't know that we are actually a provincial entity. We actually provide these services to the rest of Ontario, and you can see some of the numbers there, how many people we've reached in the GTA and the rest of Ontario. someone who's building something in Sault Ste. Marie and has responsibility to entrepreneurs and living in Kenora should equally be able to access things the same way as someone living in Toronto. That's the principles we live by and want to make sure we are including. And people in the Main Street businesses, as you can imagine, some of the jurisdictions we go to, even if you're having a unique bakery store or you have a interesting niche product, you have to be online, you have to be in social media, you have to have all of those tech-enabled elements in your business. It doesn't matter, it's not siloed. We are doing a disservice by saying, you're a Main Street business, you don't need to know tech. So we're trying to be inclusive, making sure everybody understands the importance of that through our programming and so on. And then lastly, the work that we're doing around diversity, inclusion, belonging. I have the unique advantage of working on both sides. I work with ventures. My job is to curate the ventures coming through the door and helping them with programs to help them grow their business. But the other part of my job is also to help them scale. So we work with 1,200 entrepreneurs, like I said. They employ 13,000 full-time people. They're mostly growing at 25-30% year over year. That means they are employing a lot of people in this community, whether it's tech, business, senior people, or people just entering into a job. We don't have enough of the community is not being included to meet this job needs. We keep hearing talent saying, I can't find the opportunity. And we keep hearing the startups saying, we can't find the people. There's something amiss. Something is getting disconnected. We were trying to understand what's going on. What's the disconnect? So, like I said, we build with data. We look at what's the evidence, what's happening. So we did a study last year talked to just in the Toronto area, tech community, and the talent people in the Toronto community, and said, what's going on? Why are you not finding the opportunities? The kind of things that they said is, I am not working in the area that I want to. I'm not utilizing all my skills. I don't have the network that I need to go into the tech community, so I'm stuck in this other space. I don't know how to get there. I'm not fulfilled with my role. And they might have preconceived notions about a startup, which is, thank you, startup, as in 2 people sitting in a garage. No, we have companies that are 300 people companies doing amazing things, solving the world's problems in health and clean tech and so on. So there's a preconceived notion of what startup is. So through all of that work, and I'm going through the rest of my slides pretty quickly, it was very clear inclusivity and diversity inclusion is an important part of how they can grow. Oops. Just some of the partners we worked with recently. So the second part of our study was to say, will your startups and tech community put your hand up and look at what diversity, inclusion, belonging means in your organization? Will you be willing to do that? These companies, these organizations put their hand up. We had to educate ourselves and others. I have the privilege of being a co-chair of the Diversity, Inclusion, Belonging Council for Mars. Every day we're challenging ourselves. Are we doing the right thing? We have to show it internally that we're doing the work. And we've talked, some of the speakers talked about this. It's a no-brainer to be able to be inclusive around productivity and the market access that you would have and the people you're selling to. And it's not just about ethnicity. It's not just about gender. It's about mindset. It's about including people who have a design brain and art brain and some other type of skill set together to solve for problems. That's when you can have amazing outputs, right? And so through that survey, I'll skip through all of these a little bit. Some things came out which probably are not a surprise. More women feel underrepresented in the tech community, feel that they feel a bias. More trans employees feel uncomfortable talking about their gender diversity. Indigenous people were nowhere to be seen. It was an open survey that we shared. I know they are in tech communities. We actually, after this, went to the Ministry of Indigenous Affairs and said, can you help us? The next time you do this, we need to reach those people, understand. They obviously didn't feel comfortable doing the survey. Millennials feel the reverse oppression. You know, they feel like older people like myself are biasing against, you're too young to understand this, or they don't take their input into consideration. Smaller organizations, luckily, are doing better than large. Not surprising, because they probably are more nimble and they're able to adopt it better. And then another key question we ask is, do you have someone in your organization that is identified as responsible for diversity, inclusion, belonging? Surprisingly, a lot of organizations don't. So they couldn't name anybody as someone who's responsible for culture and all of that, which is an interesting thing to know, that you have to name it so that people can go to that person. It's not just HR, right? It's not all about just HR. It's an adjacent role. And so lastly, I know that there's some things happening in our tech community. We actually have entrepreneurs in our tech community, like Forte is one who had this amazing DIBS survey that they have, a very unique survey, which we used. There are companies like Nokri who have they basically have a non-identifiable resumes so that people can make judgments about the roles based on just the capabilities of the individual rather than where they went to school or gender or other things or names and so on. So I know there's small changes happening in our tech community. This is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what we've been able to do. And I hope to continue on learning more from scholars like people here today and push the tech community to be more inclusive. Thank you so much.
Good morning. Oh, it's afternoon now. How many of you have seen that movie, The Post, about Catherine Graham of the Washington Post? Yeah. So there's, you recall how throughout the movie she's trying to make this decision about whether to release the Pentagon Papers, whether to take a company public, and so forth. And what struck me most about that movie was just how throughout, as she was trying to make these decisions, her entire board, which was completely made up of men, kept questioning her ability to make the decisions. They didn't think that she knew what she was doing. When she was going, the investment bankers that she was working with all thought that she wasn't, capable. And yet she made these very courageous decisions, like publishing the Pentagon Papers that ultimately led to the downfall of the U.S. president. And we're seeing that again today with Nancy Pelosi standing up to Donald Trump. Now, as an African man, I can really relate to what Catherine Graham was going through, because my entire life, my talent has been underestimated. This is a picture of me. Is this working? Down? Oh, there we go. That's me. Let me tell you a short story. This is me at the age of 4. Okay, actually, it was maybe 2, but still, I was young. And I vividly remember being picked up from school one day by my mother. It was the end of first grade. And the teacher that I had was a nun from England, an English nun. And she walked me to the car with my mother, and she was shaking her head and just saying, "There's no hope for this boy." And the reason she said that was because I had come 24th out of 25th in class. First of all, what is she thinking giving first graders exams? And she was just basically writing me off at that age, saying that there was no hope for me because of my performance in that test. Now, of course, my mother didn't believe her and made sure that I developed and got me the help that I needed and so forth. And so today, I wonder what that nun would say if she heard that I'd graduated in the top 10% of my class at the Stanford Business School and had started 6 companies, raise 200 million US dollars, and employ 1,000 people. I wonder what she would say today. And so when I look at this issue of diversity and inclusion, very often we talk about diversity and inclusion from the lens of fairness and justice. We need to include people from so-called overlooked overlooked communities because we're helping those people. We're doing them a favor. We need to give them an opportunity. But what I really believe is that the rest of the world is actually the one that benefits when we include people who are from so-called underserved communities. Why? So I believe that much of the world's innovation in the 21st century is going to come from these so-called overlooked communities for 3 reasons. The first, fresh ideas. The fact that people, 50% of the entire globe population that is female, is not adequately included in the economy or in places where decisions are made, means the minute you bring that in, you get 50% of the global human capacity, thinking capacity of ideas coming into the economy, coming into whatever sectors. You can just imagine the untapped potential, fresh ideas that are brought to bear when you bring people from so-called overlooked communities. The second reason is people from such communities are used to living with constraints. So for example, I come from Africa, from Ghana. I grew up in different countries around the world. We don't have a lot of money in Africa, and we have a lot of challenges, huge problems to solve in healthcare and education and climate change and infrastructure. And we have very little time because our population is growing at the fastest rate in the world. So we have to figure out how to solve our problems very quickly, with very little time, with very few resources. If we figure out how to deliver world-class healthcare at 5% of the cost of what it costs to deliver in the US or Europe, who's going to benefit? Right? If we figure out how to develop new transportation systems that leapfrog existing systems, the rest of the world is going to benefit from that. And we've seen this happen. For example, today you can use Apple Pay, mobile money. We were doing that 20 years ago in Africa. And it's an innovation that suddenly came in. It was actually developed in Africa when mobile money was first created. Today, every single person in the world can benefit from a heart transplant. Do you know where the first heart transplant in the world was done? Who can tell me where the first heart transplant in the world was done? South Africa. A South African doctor made the first heart transplant in the world. Now the entire world can benefit from that. There's a young South African man who left at the age of 16 to move to Canada. And today, Tesla, SpaceX, PayPal, Elon Musk. Okay, he's a bit crazy, but many, many great innovations that the world is talking about came from him. Did you know that the Mars rover robot that NASA sent to explore the red planet was developed by a Ghanaian scientist who works at NASA? So many of these innovations that we are benefiting from, including right here in Toronto, the general manager of the Raptors, Masai Ujiri, is actually a good friend of mine, from Nigeria, one of the great general managers in the NBA. So many, many, many innovations that the world benefits from have come out of an overlooked community like that which you see in Africa. And this is despite the lack of education, the lack of investment in human capacity in Africa. So imagine how much more could come out if we took a deliberate approach to investing in human capital potential in Africa. And 40% of the world's population is going to be African by the end of the century. So when I look at investing in human capital in Africa, I don't see it as we're doing Africans a favor. This is the greatest opportunity for innovation and entrepreneurship that the world is facing. Many, many of the challenges that you are facing globally are going to be solved by Africans, because that's where the untapped human potential is sitting today. And that is really what I think we need to do when we need to reframe this whole discussion about innovation and diversity, because it's not about saving underserved people. It's about really unlocking the potential for the entire world. The final thing is a scale. 50% of the world's population, women. 40% of the world's population, African. Just imagine how much innovation and creativity can be unlocked when you harness this massive scale of brain power that is right now not fully developed. A couple more examples. I run a school in South Africa that has a mission of finding the most exceptional young people in Africa and developing them for Africa and for the world's benefits. We select 100 young people every year in this school, and most of them are orphans, refugees. They come from disadvantaged communities. They're not coming from privileged backgrounds. Here's an example of an innovation that one of our graduates has come up with. Young woman from Ghana. She went to our school, and then she ended up in Duke University, biomedical engineering. She's now developed a way for screening women for cervical cancer without using a speculum. This is not an African innovation. It's a global innovation. Imagine how this is going to benefit women all around the world. Or we have Spencer, another one of our graduates. He came from South Africa, from a single mother home, very poor background. He went through our institution, ended up at Harvard, did a degree in mechanical engineering, and then joined McKinsey & Company as a consultant. Today, he's developed a company that is building airships to transport cargo across Africa. So it turns out that the energy that you need to move an airship through the air is only the energy that you need to displace the air in front of it. So his idea is to create, if you put 10 airships in a row, they only need the same engine, right? So his idea is to create a train of airships where one takes off from Cape Town, another one takes off from Johannesburg, and then they meet up in the air and they travel. And when you get to one city, you drop it off and so forth. I mean, this is a global innovation. He's thinking like Elon Musk. And I want to show you a prototype that he's built. So you can see an example of what a 27-year-old African is doing to reshape global transportation systems. Because when this is developed, you can imagine this coming back to the US and to Canada and so forth to allow a new generation of transportation. Is it happening? Yeah, so this is his prototype that he's built. And Airbus and all these other companies are talking to him now to see how this can become commercialized. Thank you. And this goes on. So I want to share with you 3 principles. Oh, sorry, just before I do that. 99% of our students from this academy, African Leadership Academy, attend university. And 80% of them come to the top colleges in the world. These are some of the universities. We've sent about 20 to Stanford. We've sent about 20 to Yale, 16 to Cornell, and so forth. The best universities in the world. And these are orphans, refugees, very, very disadvantaged backgrounds all across Africa. They outperform when they go to these universities. They're not performing at basic levels. The average GPA is 3.4 in these top universities. And 93% of them complete in less than 5 years. The typical US college graduate takes them, only 60% are finishing within 6 years. So high performance. But you wouldn't predict it from when you look at and these are some of the companies that they're working at, right? So we've taken 1,000 graduates through this institution. They're working at Google, Facebook, you name it. 86% of the managers who hire them rate them as performing at 4 out of 5 or higher compared to typical graduates that they're getting from who haven't been through our institution. Now, I want to share with you 3 principles that we use to unlock this talent pool that we're seeing in Africa, and which I think it would be relevant as we think about unlocking the talent pool in other communities that have not been as included, such as women and people with different sexual orientation and so forth. These principles, I believe, can be relevant there as well. The first principle that we use is that we have to select people differently and look at talent differently. For example, we don't use when our graduates apply to universities, their SAT scores are on average about 100 to 150 points lower than typical students who are applying to these universities. Now, what does an exam show? An exam shows that you're good at following instructions and that you don't challenge, you're good at just sort of memorizing things and repeating it again. Innovators are not people who follow instructions, right? So you need to think about alternative ways to find this. So we look at grit and passion and creativity far more. We weight that far more than exam scores when we select our students. If I look at my own performance on the GMAT, I performed way below those who went to Stanford, but I graduated in the top 10% of my class. Because when you're taking these exams, they're talking about things like maple syrup. I don't know what maple syrup is. So it's not designed to identify that creative potential, that innovation spirit that you might find in this talent pool. So the first thing we have to do differently is to select differently, right? If you want to look for innovators, don't look at people who are used to following instructions. You need to, and that's all that exams like SATs and GMAT tell you, that someone knows how to memorize things. The second thing we do is that you have to develop this talent differently, right? So after several years of sending our young innovators and entrepreneurs to universities in the US and so forth, we decided that we would create our own university in Africa. So we launched something called the African Leadership University. And we're using this to scale to develop 3 million innovators and entrepreneurs out of Africa in the next 15 years. We've developed a very innovative model that allows us to develop world-class talent at 5% of the cost of traditional universities. Remember I said we have lots of constraints in Africa, so we have to think differently. So we had to think differently about how we were going to unlock this potential. And we've come up with a model that today is producing globally relevant and globally competitive talent at 5% of the cost of traditional universities in the US and Europe and so forth. So how are we doing this? Well, one of the ways we realized we had to do this was we don't have professors in Africa, right? We have a very scarce resource in terms of professors. So we had to flip our learning model from being professor-driven to student-driven, moving it from something that is a scarce resource to building a system around an abundant resource. So our students learn by themselves. They teach each other using a lot of peer-to-peer learning. And then they still might go to class every now and then, but the person that comes to class isn't necessarily a professor with a PhD. It's a mid-career professional, it's a retired executive. We don't have exams. Sometimes we do because regulators insist we should. But we believe that the best way to assess them is through projects, not through exams. Let them work on things, let them develop things together. One of the things we're doing is getting rid of academic majors, because we feel that it's much more important that we expose them to the challenges of the world. So we give our students, we have a degree called the Bachelor of Arts in Global Challenges, where we give our students a menu of the biggest problems facing the world: healthcare, education, climate change, governance, youth unemployment. And then we ask them not to declare an academic major, but to declare a mission. So pick one of these problems and then curate your own learning experience around the problem that you want to solve. You design which courses you want to take online, what projects you want to do, what experts you want to shadow. You build prototypes, you do experiments. And then from that, radical innovation is coming out, where you're saying, think differently and make sure that you also set their mindset so differently. So one of the things when you walk into any of our campuses, you see a sign that says, do hard things. Because we realize that being an innovator, being an entrepreneur, is going to be difficult. So we put them into very difficult challenges, because especially if they're coming from underprivileged backgrounds and they go into the mainstream world, they're going to have to face a lot of hardship. So we condition them to make sure that they're ready to deal with all the ups and downs of entrepreneurship and innovation and so forth. And we see at the end of the day that our objective is not to teach them facts and figures, but rather to get them to learn how to learn and how to solve problems. Because as artificial intelligence and robotics comes along, problem solvers will always be in fashion. You won't be able to eliminate their jobs. And so that's how we're creating this new generation of innovators and entrepreneurs. We can open a new campus in 60 days and very rapidly scale up. And finally, you have to support them differently. So one of the things we realized as we were sending our young leaders from the academy to universities outside of Africa was that when we send them in cohorts, like when we send them in groups to universities, they perform much, much better than when they went to places by themselves. Because yeah, you can just imagine arriving in Minnesota or the coldest part of Canada, and you've come from a very tropical country and you don't know anyone. The things that are just going to be, so you need to think differently about how do you support this talent, right? We have a whole system we built a whole system in the US that would make sure that we would gather our talent together for professional development workshops, for, to get them to go back to Africa for internships and to mentor them and so forth. And that's what allowing us to see such fantastic results, right? So I want to end by really saying that we are sitting on the cusp of a golden era of prosperity and innovation. Not just for Africa, not just for women, not just for people from different backgrounds. It's really about saying, if we can unlock the talent pool of 50% of the world, of so many communities that are today not fully included, this is not only about benefiting those people, it's really about creating the greatest wave of innovation and prosperity that the entire world will see. Thank you.
So I'm a little overwhelmed. Thank you to all four of you. That was really marvelous. I was thinking as I was listening about all of the points of convergence and the parallels as well as some of the points of divergence, and it would be so wonderful if we had more time with you before people start running off for lunch and other things to have more interaction amongst you. But in a way, you've set the table for us to do this hard work now and for us to think about some of the issues that you've raised. So thank you very much for coming in and clearly preparing and sharing your work with us. I know that I'm about to step out the door to another institution, but I'm gonna make sure that what has begun here will continue. I want to send a quick shout out to Allison Bishop. If she's here, she's an education and communications advisor in my, there you are, in my office. Allison came to our office in August of last year, and no sooner had she received the keys to her office than I had her, booking venues and flights and so on to take care of all of the logistical planning for this event. As some of you will know, these kinds of things take a lot of work to put together. So I really express my profound thanks to Allison for her superior diligence and heroic effort. We now, yes. We will now break. Please stay around if you can to talk about what you've heard and to use that hashtag Inclusion Day 2019. There's some food, as I say, out in the atrium. There's a kosher selection for those of you who would prefer. Again, thank you for taking time out of your schedule to be here in amidst inclement weather, January in Toronto, etc. But you are the diehards, and so we're relying on all of you to take this forward. Thank you, and thank you again to Miller Thompson. Greatly appreciate it. Oh. I must also ask now our student ambassadors, the president student ambassadors. Dear God, I almost forgot you. Please come forward, and I will ask our panelists to stand up as well and take one last note of appreciation as you receive your gifts from the university. Thank you very much.